Hi, my name is Jim Ryan, and I'm the new instructional designer here at EWU. My job here is to take a look at the programs, courses, and people from a different point of view, to see how all these Lego pieces fit, and to imagine how I can help put them together differently to make something new and amazing. Welcome to the Play to Learn podcast. Today, I'm meeting with Nick Gerdes, a senior student here at Eastern Washington University with a background in computer programming and, most importantly, an accomplished dungeon master for the D&D club on campus. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Well, hello. My name is James Ryan, and today I am speaking with Nick Gerdes. Is that how you pronounce your name?
Gerdes.
Gerdes. Okay, thank you for the correction. Alrighty, so the reason I've gathered us all here today is I had the great fortune of coming in and sitting in on one of your D&D sessions. Mostly I'm curious about D&D because of the different game mechanics it offers and the tools that can be kind of gleaned from it and apply that to education and course design. But before I get to that part, tell me just a little bit about you and your backstory, I guess your origin story. What are you doing here at EWU?
Well, I came to EWU 4 years ago. I wanted to get involved in stuff on campus like clubs and organizations and stuff. And at the time there was a gaming club, but there was nothing like specifically for D&D. And gaming club was like board games in general, but nothing specifically about D&D. Then somebody did make a D&D club later, but I wasn't usually able to go to that for scheduling reasons.
So what subject do you? I mean, you're in your fourth year. Is this your last quarter, or you still have some to go?
I have a little bit left to go. I'm interdisciplinary studies with computer science and economics.
That's definitely an interesting combo. What are you looking to do when you graduate?
I was hoping to get maybe into like finance or banking.
Those are definitely good industries to be in, especially right now.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So one thing that really caught my eye at the beginning of that D&D session was when you opened up your computer and you started a command line program that you had specifically written to help you DM. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, there's a lot of different things in the game that you have to track, like numerically. There's turn orders, for example. So one player will do their thing and then the next player does their thing. And when you're coordinating like a specific order of players around a table, if it's not just going in a circle around the table, it's sometimes a little tricky to track who goes after what in remembering the order. So I wrote a program that tracks the order that players can do stuff in, and then I just kind of added a little bit more to it over time to track more and more.
So I think Wizards of the Coast have their own probably DM software. I mean, at least I think so. I think I've read something about that. Do you know anything about them or what like the differences would be between what you came up with? Is it better suited for just local groups, or is there some kind of other uses it could be used for?
I think I know what you're talking about, but there's a lot of different what they call virtual tabletops, which are platforms for playing the tabletop games like D&D or Pathfinder or what have you over the internet. So there's this one that I use called Roll20, and a lot of those have a lot of different fancy features where like you can show where the characters are on the map, and then you can like show the layout of the rooms and stuff on the screen. And a lot of those do have turn trackers and such built in, but I just think it's a little more ergonomic to use something I made myself, but I use a combination most of the time.
There's a little bit of self-confidence and satisfaction in being able to custom make your own things that you can use. I know the feeling, trust me. We can talk about that stuff later, but I think that's really cool and innovative of you to have come up with something like that. The other thing that caught my ear was you had a bunch of different tabs open, and depending on the situation that the players were in, you had different music queued up that you'd start to play. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it helps immerse players and set the vibe, the mood of like whatever the scene is that's going on in the game. So if there's like a tense combat, I'll put on some like tense combat like soundtrack or like ambient. You might hear like swords, clashing in the background. Like it shouldn't be too loud or disruptive or distracting, but as long as it kind of fades into the background, it helps enhance the experience for players.
Yeah, as somebody who comes from a video production background, seeing somebody manage that live was really interesting, and you did so masterfully, by the way.
Thank you.
So the other thing, story cues. You had set up the basic premise, and you had this big chart in front of you, and then you had all these different cards and maps. And I mean, how do you organize all those things in order to tell the story? And like, do you come up with the story beforehand, or is everything pre-made, or just kind of give me the context and the logistics about how you'd run a campaign like that?
It really depends on the specific campaign. The one I was running at that table was a pre-written module. So most of the time, most of the stuff that would happen in that adventure is something that basically was pre-written in advance by the writers at Wizards of the Coast. But things can still happen that those writers didn't anticipate and can really change how the story unfolds. For example, after you left, the players, they had gone and they defeated this whole like army of orcs, and then they managed to turn their orcs to the side, and they led that army to go kill a dragon, which isn't something, I don't think that's how you're supposed to do it as written, but the player's choice and their choices and the rolls of the dice led to that narrative unfolding. So when you're DMing, you also have to be reactive and recognize which story beats are unfolding and nurture the ones that are best for the story and enable players to have control over the story and how it unfolds.
So yeah, I noticed that the players definitely were able to make a bunch of different choices, but as the DM, I noticed there was a little bit of nudging as well.
Yeah, sometimes players get a little lost and they don't know what they should do or if they're supposed to do something or what the wrong choice might be. And then it's up to the DM to, like you said, subtly nudge them into doing just something so the story can keep moving forward. Because if you don't, you might just be sitting around the table kind of awkwardly waiting in silence for a while.
That's very interesting. So now you have these different players playing these different characters in these different roles, and they all have different abilities, and they all have different actions that they can take. How do you wrangle those logistics? Like, I mean, it's one thing to say, a player can choose to do X, but I mean, there's so many variables involved. How do you put that into the story, I guess? I mean, if that makes any sense.
I guess I'm not really the one who puts their character's abilities into the story. They're the ones who decide when their character is going to cast such and such spell, or they're going to try and climb this wall or hide around this corner. And then my job as the DM is to decide how that plays in the game world. If they hide around like this corner, they might overhear this conversation, or if they cast this spell and they're going to climb up this wall, I have to know what's going to be, over the other side of that wall so that I can tell them what they see.
So you have to have a very 30,000-foot top-down view mentally of what all is going on in a given area with the different people so that you can, I guess, translate that mental image into their experience.
It certainly helps to have a really broad and deep understanding of how the game world is set up and where all the pieces are, so to speak. Realistically, you don't always know where everything is all the time, and you have to be able to make something up on the spot that sounds reasonable and ideally is reasonable. There's a lot of improv and there's a lot of preparation that goes into it.
Yeah, and the way I'm looking at this, and I'm trying to marry two concepts here, and that of that gamification side and that world building side that Dungeons and Dragons and that style of role playing gameplay offers, along with a very serious, very structured course that has to impart a certain amount of knowledge into the students. And there's a certain amount of sandboxing that could be allowed and a certain amount of variables that could come into play from the gaming side. And there's needs to be a little bit of flexibility and creativity on the course side. And so I guess I'm kind of spitballing what your thoughts would be on how to maybe bring those things together in something that's workable.
Yeah, you would have to keep it not as open world, not as sandbox. If you're trying to like have the specific narrative reach like specific points so that they like learn the right lessons at the right time, that'd be what dungeon masters call railroading, which is fine sometimes, especially if players are a little lost. And plenty of players are also like fine with that most of the time, as long as they know that's how it is.
So you have these two, I don't know, are they majors that you went with, the finance and the computing, or is it
Those are minors, yeah.
minors? So let's take your programming minor. Say you were put in a course and, it's some kind of computer programming course and you have to create a story around it. So, you want to make it a little bit exciting for the students that are going to be playing it. So maybe, do you remember that really goofy 1990s movie called Hackers?
I actually haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it? Oh, well, it's probably before your time. I'm showing my age, but it was a great kind of obviously way over dramatized version of what computer hacking is, but it kind of has the philosophy of hacking ingrained in it. And so, the idea that I would have for something like that would be, okay, you have this group of hackers and they have to come up with this program. Then you have a second bunch of hackers that are actually black hat hackers, the ones that are the bad guys, basically. And so you're these white hat hackers that are trying to stop these black hat hackers from, taking over, a financial institution. So how can we start? It would depend on the lesson plan, of course, whatever the instructor would have. And you've gone through all of them at this point. But I mean, do you see where I'm going with kind of the storyline narrative?
So like the narrative would be you're white hat hackers, you're writing programs to like stop the bad guys.
Right.
Yeah, I can see where you're going with that.
Yeah, and then so, like, I don't know necessarily what different types of coding you would have to do, but you'd have to structure it in a way to where, the first module of the first week, the students learn how to do X, whatever that programming task would be. And then the story around it would be, okay, if you can complete this and get it executed correctly, you can stop this bad thing from happening. And then as the course goes on and the coding gets more complicated, the students would have to constantly build on the weeks that they've previously done and come up with more and more elaborate code to match what needs to be done and the content for that given week.
That sounds pretty neat.
So that is kind of what I'm getting at. And then what other mechanics from D&D do you think could fit into that kind of a narrative? Like what could the teacher's the DM in this case, and the students are the players. Pick a course that you recently took in programming. Just kind of say, tell me what course it was and what it involved.
Data structures.
Okay, data structures. So what did you have to learn in like the first week?
Well, data structure. Well, I don't remember what it was the first week. This was like a few quarters ago, but
Mhm.
we went through different types of data structure. So we went over like linked lists was early on, and we went over search trees and balanced trees and
Right. So
all the
some
different data structures.
some different tasks like that. So if you could imagine where one of those data structures would be used in, say, I don't know, a major company, and how somebody would need to program that data structure in order to function correctly. And then the next part would be trying to figure out a story plot line that would match up with the overarching story.
I mean, I think there's a few different ways you could do it, like for each data structure, but linking them all together, like in the context of a narrative.
It might not always be possible, but it's a fun thought experiment that I'm trying to play around with.
Oh, I think it can be done. Yeah, it would take a little bit to think of like the optimal way to do it for me
Sure,
as
of
a
course.
non-teacher.
Instructing and then instructional design, it's kind of like a team game where the instructor is the one that has all the knowledge, and then the instructional designer is trying to find different ways to impart that knowledge to the students in a way that's more fun and engaging for them. And one of the better ways to do it at this point, where everything is going because it is more effective, is the gamification aspect. And not that many places are really making use of it as much. And so I'm really trying to push that here at EWU. And so being able to see you out there running a whole D&D campaign and how you are able to organize and see all the different types of variables and keep everything in your head or in your computer, and then manipulate the environment with music, is really like watching that, but just in a different setting, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
Do you think you have a natural interest in the stuff that you were learning between the comp sci, the programming, and the financial stuff?
I think the comp sci stuff definitely comes more naturally to me. As for like the economics, the finance type stuff, I think that's just a good career to pursue.
And do you think you would be wanting to pursue it kind of by marrying those two skills together?
I think so, yeah.
Is there anything specific that you think, like a specific role that you feel is out there that would take advantage of that?
I think it would be really cool to use, and they were already doing this, but to continue using machine learning in like economic forecasting, for
Oh,
example.
okay. Are you big in AI?
I mean, I don't know that much about like actually writing my own model yet, but with all the chat GPT and stuff that has been coming around the past few years, I think it's really interesting.
What different types of AI have you played around with?
Mostly Google's Gemini. There's the ChatGPT Copilot. Gemini is great for D&D prep, by the way.
Oh, yeah? And actually, that's another thing that I did want to bring up to you because I'd been exploring it in my previous job, and that there have been some companies that have been exploring using AI to, I guess, fully occupy NPCs. So depending on what NPC you go up and talk to in a given game, they would have an AI that would tap into that NPC's character sheet and understand its background story and the maybe the quest prompts that it would have, and then that AI would, I guess, riff, but also communicating the information accurately to the player when they're talking.
That sounds pretty neat. I think I have heard of something like that, yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be extremely useful, not just in that game setting, but also in a classroom setting if people are having to, role play and they have to interact with, I guess, a quest giver or, some person who would be playing a role that they have to work against or work for. Playing against or playing with an AI would definitely be an interesting tool there. Have you messed much with Stable Diffusion?
Yeah, I've heard of that. There's better ones out there like Midjourney.
Yeah, I think it bounces back and forth quite a bit. Like every other week, I think one comes up with something that one-ups the other. There's a whole new model or downloadable models that you can use. Stable Diffusion is one that I use quite a bit. A friend of mine uses Midjourney and comes up with just insanely beautiful imagery. And then there's another one, I can't remember quite the name of it, but it's node based. Have you worked much in programs that use node based logic?
Yes.
So in this one, you basically build custom nodes that perform different tasks, and then you you link up the inputs and outputs, and then it gives you an output at the end as long as you've hooked everything up and done it right. But nodal stuff is still a little bit confusing for me.
Actually, I think I know which one you're talking about, if it's the one I'm thinking of.
It probably is. The name is just escaping me right now, and I can't remember it. But I think you know what I'm talking about, and I'll probably interject it at some point when I find it.
I think that one is Comfy UI.
Comfy UI. Thank you. Comfy UI. That is it. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very fun one. Well, to see the outputs from. It's an absolute nightmare and trying to learn how to use it unless you're just using somebody else's templates, and then it's easy.
Yeah.
I just find AI really amazing and useful, but it has a lot of limitations and it does hallucinate quite a bit.
Yeah, you can't really rely on it for anything. Well, if it cites its sources, I think Copilot sometimes you can get, like if you ask it, can find me a web page for such and such, then you can actually read over the web page yourself and vet it. That's one way that can be useful. The creative stuff you can use it too, but yeah, you can't use it for getting good info directly out of it.
So what about the financing stuff that you said you wanted to look into using it for?
So I've been writing this paper all quarter. There's a few papers about it already, but they're developing models. There was this one model that I think he was a Swiss guy made, where they trained it on historical financial data, and then they were able to use that to like quote unquote predict financial crises that would happen later in the data set based on the earlier data. So he was and his colleagues were using it to like predict financial crises, but there were ones that already happened. So it was verifying it, so to speak. And then theoretically, you can extrapolate that going forward to know when there might be one in the future and act on that.
So a very predictive based on past
which is what AI does.
patterns. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Sure.
Exactly what AI does. So that's on the much larger scale. Are you thinking also on like the smaller scale? Because I'm sure you're aware that there'd probably be some very interested parties if there was a AI model that could do predictive futures on stocks and bonds and well, not bonds. Bonds are pretty much the same, but stocks and other investments.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool topic.
And so the kind of thing that I'd like to incorporate into the different course designs, little tips, tricks, and tools to get the students to go back and review the content that they've learned over the course, but going back over it to kind of keep it fresh in their heads and then use what they've learned in order to accomplish something, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Does that sound like something that would be interesting to you or other students maybe?
So they're like learning a little thing each as they go, and then at the end they would use that, or are you saying they would use each little bit continuously as they go and then use it all again at the end?
Well, so they learn about the concepts all the way through the course,
Yeah.
but at the end of the course, they'd have to put those concepts together to solve the riddles.
I think that's a really cool idea. You just have to make sure that there's enough clues that they can afford to miss some of them and still get by just fine. Sure. This reminds me a little bit of something in D&D.
Please go on.
Whenever you do have these sort of more scavenger hunt or investigation type adventures, there's this little thing called the 3 clue rule, because the kind of the scavenger hunt thing, like you were saying, to make the class more engaging, kind of reminds me of when I write a D&D adventure in a similar way. I'll have, clues here and clues there, and they have to piece it together, discover whatever it is they're trying to discover. Whenever I do that, at least, I've always made sure there's something a lot of DMs do called the 3 clue rule. It comes from this blog post called the Alexandrian, but the idea is that players are going to miss most of the clues that you give them, which in this case, your players would be your students. And when you have these like subtle clues, you want to have things pointing to it so they have some idea to look there, but you also want to have 3 times as many clues as you want in case they get missed. Now, maybe because they're just always there all the time, students will realize that this is a clickable link, or maybe not, but overstock the clues.
Sure, absolutely. So another tool within Canvas that I am aiming to change a bit are the discussion boards. Now, in most discussion boards, what they will do is they'll give you, let's say, maybe a different topic each week and just kind of ask your thoughts on it and then have you maybe reply to 1 or 2 of your other students with your opinion on what they posted. Does that sound kind of what you have experienced on discussion boards that you participated in?
Yeah, basically every discussion board is exactly what you're describing.
Okay, good. So what if it was a little bit different? In that sense, what if there was a task that was going to be ongoing over the entire course of the course, and students have to research specific information regarding that task, and based on the information that they find, they have to present an argument and then debate the other students instead of just commenting on their post, actually offer either a critique or an attaboy, but also give reasoning behind it.
I do think that would be better face to face, but for like an online class, that might be as good as you're going to get.
Because discussion boards are kind of flat otherwise.
Sure. Usually when I go in to do the discussion boards, I am just doing the discussion board, and I'm not thinking too much about it before or after. But maybe that's just how it's been in the past with how they're set up.
Is there anything you would change about them to make them more interesting? And maybe again thinking about integrating D&D mechanics into that kind of a situation?
I'd have to think about that for longer.
But I really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk with me because it's amazing for me to see the creativity and organization that's involved with just D&D by itself. And I just think there's a connection there that can be really integrated into student learning to make it more fun for everybody instead of making it feel so much of a chore. So again, Nick, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope we get a chance to talk together soon. And I hope to come and watch some more of your campaigns.
Thank you.